come one very soon. But what do folks need to know?
Well, first off, Kate, there is no Rick Gates without Paul Manafort. This is someone who is seen as a protege, very much in lockstep with Paul Manafort. And when Paul Manafort was the chairman on the Trump campaign, Gates was his deputy. So he was working in a capacity as an aide to the Trump campaign. And this stemmed from the fact that he had been a longtime business associate working with Manafort at his lobbying firm for years and years. So they had been very much associated together in business for some time, and that had to do, of course, working with a number of clients who included foreign leaders, including a number of pro-Russian foreign leaders. And then after Manafort was ousted from the campaign, you fast forward a little bit, and eventually Gates was working for America First, the pro-Trump PAC, and that was short-lived. But then he went on to work with Tom Barrack, who, as you know, Kate, is someone very closely associated with President Trump as a confidant. He ran his inaugural committee. But again, this all stems back to Paul Manafort, who was the campaign chairman for a short period of time, but for a key period of time during the Trump campaign, allowing him to get the delegates he needed to become the nominee, going through the convention until Paul Manafort stepped down amid questions of his ties to pro-Russian leaders, including specifically the Ukrainian president, Viktor Yanukovych, who was ousted in 2014. He'd been accused of laundering millions and millions of dollars. There was questions about whether Manafort and others had helped him accomplish that. And we learned, Kate, that Manafort had actually been under surveillance by the feds in 2014 and then again in 2016. That was really the cloud under which he ended up stepping down from the campaign.
Mm-hmm. That's exactly right. And this indictment says that they're looking at activities between 2006 and 2017, so all the way through. Brianna, great to see you.
That's
Thank
right.
you so much. The panel is back with me to discuss this element of this, and there's a lot to go through. Because it seems, and you said it, Jeffrey, this is you would know, I do not. This is a long indictment. It seems complicated reading it.
It is.
Talk to me about these charges, though. So you've got conspiracy against the United States, conspiracy to launder money, acting as unregistered agents of a foreign principal, misleading statements, false statements, failure to report. What does it all say?
That's a good question, because like what's the deal with this guy?
Yeah.
What is the government saying he did wrong? The gist of it is that he was a representative of the Ukrainian government at a time when it was very pro-Putin. He was paid millions of dollars, and he wanted to cover that up. He wanted to cover up how much money he made. He wanted to cover up what he was doing for them, and the timing of his relationship with the Ukrainians. That's the gist of this case. Another point to make about the complexity of it is that if this case goes to trial, given the way the federal legal system works, there is no way this case could get to trial in less than 6 months.
Oh, really?
Absolutely not. I mean, this is a complicated case. Undoubtedly, there will be lots of motions made by the defense, as is their right. They will ask for discovery. They will ask to have the case dismissed on various grounds. And,
so I'm pushing for Mueller to wrap this up.
Well, that's my point, is that anyone who thinks that Mueller is on the verge of ending in 2017, this will dissuade them of that. This guarantees that the Mueller investigation will go well into 2018.
You know, it probably means it's going to go into 2019, because you have to figure these are the first indictments coming down. If there are other indictments, which there undoubtedly will be, let's say hypothetically this one gets tried first, and I agree with Jeffrey completely. 6 months is an optimistic trial date. Those subsequent indictments are probably going to push into late 2018, maybe even into 2019. So we're looking at a very long investigation, even though it appears that Mueller's moving quickly.
Would you expect these to be the first charges out of the gate?
Well, I mean, once we knew that the FBI had executed a search warrant at Manafort's house,
right?
You don't execute a search warrant at someone's house unless you have very good suspicion that they, I mean, you can't get a search warrant unless the magistrate agrees that there is probable cause to, that there will be,
especially in the way that they did it, right?
Right. There will be evidence of criminal activity there. So we've known he was investigating Manafort in a very serious way for a couple of months. So it's not a surprise that Manafort was indicted. I think it is somewhat of a surprise that Gates is indicted. He is not someone who is on my radar screen, and I follow these matters pretty closely. And I'm not aware he was on many other people's radar screens. So that, I think, is somewhat of a surprise. And certainly the guilty plea by Papadopoulos is a major surprise.
Yeah, major.
Especially since, you know, his statement to the FBI wasn't even made when Mueller was the special counsel. It was made 4 months before that, in January.
Let me bring in Shimon Prokupecz. He's part of the team that broke the fact that this indictment was coming on Friday afternoon. Shimon, some of your reporting is that when it comes to Manafort and Gates, when it comes to this indictment, is something that could be involved here is that they could be up against something of a clock, some kind of statute of limitations deadline. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct, and that has to do with some of the tax charges and some of the tax violations, and that's why we knew that the special prosecutor was kind of under the gun here. There were some timing issues. So what we all along thought maybe what might happen is maybe they'll indict him on one of the charges, so they're sort of to stop the clock on whatever it is that they were concerned about, and then eventually maybe do some superseding indictments or whatever may be as they continue the investigation. We weren't certain that we were going to get the whole thing today. But, you know, I kind of want to talk about the big surprise, and this is a big surprise today, and that's Papadopoulos.
Yeah.
It's a significant development because this is a man who was in meetings with the president. I mean, it says so much in the complaint.
Well, we also even keep going, Shimon. We also even have a tweet from Donald Trump, because there's a tweet for everything. That continues to be the only rule that stays true. A tweet from March 31st of 2016 where he's tweeting about his national security team, and Papadopoulos is in the picture with him.
That's exactly right. And this is what the FBI is talking about in this affidavit that they release. And they pick and choose what they want to say in these affidavits. So there's significance here. It also tells us that they know a lot about what was going on between Trump, the campaign, and then the candidate Trump and his national security team, because Papadopoulos, according to this, is now cooperating. So they have eyes into what was going on with the national security team and the other people. I mean, there's things here about supervisors that Papadopoulos was talking to on the national security team, relaying information about his meetings with Russians. And one other important point that I want to make, and some of what we've all been reporting about how this has been sort of the Russian playbook about trying to influence campaign, trying to influence policy in the United States. It says here that a professor, whoever this person is that Papadopoulos met with, showed interest in Papadopoulos only after learning of his role in the campaign. That is significant, too, because this tells you what all of the intelligence community was concerned about. People like the former DNI director, James Clapper, and John Brennan. They all talked about seeing communications, meetings that was concerning them. And this now backs up some of what they've been saying all along.
And we're also getting, that's a very important point, and I'll leave you just with this. Jim Acosta has some new reporting in on this question of who is George Papadopoulos. Jim Acosta, as a former Trump campaign official, said that that Papadopoulos interacted with the campaign, quote, a significant amount during the 2016 election. He was a foreign policy advisor, this official said. Keep that in mind as this discussion continues going forward. We're going to have much more on our breaking news, on this breaking news ahead. Stay with us. It talks a lot. It's all about the campaign and what any comfort right now.
No, it shouldn't because of the Papadopoulos news. Otherwise, but the reaction on Capitol Hill from Republicans that I've talked to has obviously been negative. They wanted this week. That's really not going to lead the news this week because of what we've seen just this morning. Monday will to a Republican member of Congress in a district that Trump won pretty easily, who said to me that this will not end. This is a problem for Trump in the White House and also Republicans as we start to move forward to.
Your take on all this, just what's your read today?
All right, number one, with regard to Paul Manafort, with regard to Russia and the Trump campaign in the Manafort indictment. Number one, there's any collusion between the Trump campaign and Russia. I would say this, that be accountable for his actions. But, Kate, the bottom line is, let's deal with the facts and just put speculation with Russia.
Does it make it more complicated to say that very clearly, though, now with the Papadopoulos campaign? He was speaking with someone who promised dirt on Hillary Clinton in the form of...
say anything to get out of it. I've had 38 years in law enforcement, and I've learned that. He did was lie, that he could have possibly been talking, but on his behalf. There's no evidence involved. And this is why I say let Robert Mueller do his job. And at this point, they're in dragnet, the old, just the facts, ma'am, just the facts. So if we put all the speculation away and
that's a fact.
But there's also a fact that there's no evidence of any collusion, and that's what's
it. And to suggest otherwise is just really ridiculous. You have a conviction, you have a complaint, and the facts to support it. It isn't just the fact that he lied to the but he took affirmative steps, the substance of his actions, as a member of the Trump family. He met with this professor, met with Russian officials, met with a young woman, apparently, visit Putin at any time. That's not collusion. That's attempted collusion. It's they're breaking the law, they've done something wrong, or they're afraid. In this case, we got more than a corroborating individual who's been convicted and who is going to continue prosecution.
You just admitted that there was an attempt, in your view, which means never a meeting. You know, that's
of course, there were several meetings,
collusion.
if you will.
Right, but
there were several meetings.
There was an attempt at trying to collude, and we just didn't do. I mean, can you argue that today is a good day?
If there are people who do things on
the White House hasn't said anything about Papadopoulos.
Right. Well, my point is, there are people.
Where does the buck stop? When it comes to a campaign, where does the buck stop?
The buck stops at the people responsible. Would stop at the White House, but there's not one shred of evidence, Kate, that they knew that the.
Because he's a member of the campaign committee, and he certainly has connected the campaign. If not, the issue here isn't the fact of whether you obtained this information or not. The real issue is engage in this behavior directly with Russian officials, because if you have the efforts, if you are able to complete it and obtain this information, that should bother all of us.
This also is making me wonder a question that it's been kind of out there since last. Impossible for President Trump to fire Bob Mueller.
They've said that they elliptic for Donald Trump if he did so. Not only would you see more and more Democrats calling for Trump's impeachment, we've been asking, when are they going to come from? If you go back to this weekend, you know, we had such a bombshell this presidency. We're seeing somewhat of an erosion with his Republican base voters. That's why this is in the long term, because this is what we will be talking about for the next year and a half going up to the congressional of financial records, wire transfers, all this data that we don't know what is.
The only reason I'm looking down is one thing we can definitely agree on is we don't know what Bob Mueller has. That's for sure. And it seems that the president, in the face of just his campaign chairman actually facing a federal indictment, decided to he took to Twitter with the sorry, but this is years ago, before Manafort was part of the Trump campaign. And why I know you agree with both of those points. You've just made that clear. But right now.
Well, look, what he's doing is he's expressing the views of a lot of the American people. I mean, that's what people do. And what he is saying, what's on the minds of a lot of people, there's a lot of focus on this, but what about him?
Down.
There's
and
the
someone pleaded guilty to charges of false statements once. Yeah. But today, I think it's valid in this moment to be having this conversation, right?
Yes, that's fact number one, no collusion regarding the Manafort indictment. Fact number two, no collusion involving. Yeah, and if you read the opening statement of that indictment or that Mueller put together expedition, collusion.
Well, if we want to expend speculation, actually,
I have 38 years doing this.
Okay, got it. No, guys, we gotta go. Let's continue pouring in a lot from Capitol Hill. Doug High was just talking about some of the conversations he's having with folks over there. Standing by for the first court appearance by former top campaign aides Paul Manafort, and also coming up, we will see what they have to say about all of this today.
17, including the time when he was campaign chairman of the Trump campaign, Manafort, Gates, together with others. I mean, that is a very pregnant question about who are the others that they will allege are the other unindicted co-conspirators in this case, conspired to defraud the United States. So, you have the campaign chairman and a senior member of the campaign charged with defrauding the United States at precisely the time that he is the chairman of the campaign, the successful campaign of Donald Trump.
No, and again, the words here are impeding, impairing, obstructing, and defeating the lawful government functions of government agency, the Department of Justice and the Department of Treasury. And Susan Hennessy, Rick Gates didn't leave the campaign when Paul Manafort left in August of 2016. He stayed on through the fall. He then worked for the transition. He then worked for a PAC that lobbied on behalf, or worked on behalf, I should say, of the administration before he was pushed out of that. The president of the United States, Donald Trump, we know he talked to Paul Manafort through the beginning of this year, while this indictment suggests they were working to defraud and obstruct justice. That has got to be a problem at a certain level for the administration.
Well, I think it certainly is. One thing to sort of keep in mind is, you know, the scope of Mueller's investigation, right? So it's not just sort of Russian collusion or Russian interference and potential campaign collusion. It's anything that's arising out of that investigation. So it means that as Mueller is sort of going about conducting that investigation, anything else that he comes upon, including sort of prior financial crimes and including criminal activity, whenever an individual does something that violates the law of the United States in trying to obstruct his investigation or lying to federal investigators. So that is all sort of fair game within the sort of the proper scope of the Mueller investigation. So we might hear some things this morning about, oh, you know, this is a witch hunt. This is somehow proof of Mueller sort of having exceeded his scope. No, this is the kind of behavior and activity that is squarely within sort of that mandate that Deputy Attorney General Ron Rosenstein had given to Mueller in the first instance.
All right, so we also know that Rick Gates was at the White House several times this year, okay? And on top of that, we're just getting some reaction from our Jim Acosta's reporting, who, of course, is our senior White House reporter, of someone familiar with the situation, a source close to the White House. Let me read it to you. That source saying, quote, "Today has zero to do with the White House." Again, the White House's messaging here before an official statement is today has zero to do with the White House. The problem with that argument, Jeffrey Toobin, is the fact that as John said, Manafort and the president kept talking far beyond when he left, until their own lawyers said you have to stop talking, by the way. And these dates, 2006 to 2017, that's beyond his work with Ukraine.
Right. And you know, I do think it's important to point out, in fairness to what the White House is saying, is that the individual crimes charged, the making of false statements to the Department of Justice, the making of false statements to the Treasury Department, do not refer at all to the Trump campaign. However, both Manafort and Gates are charged with a conspiracy, together with others, unnamed, to defraud the United States, a conspiracy that took place while Manafort was the campaign chairman for Donald Trump, while Gates was working for Donald Trump, and that's a problem. And you know, what contacts Manafort and Gates had with the Trump campaign and the Trump White House after the president was inaugurated is something that's going to be of great interest to Robert Mueller, and I suspect of great interest to us as well.
That White House talking point, though, is telling. They are grasping onto something which is, in fact, true, that the White House not mentioned inside this 12-count indictment.
And that is
doesn't have
that's a very fair
to
point.
do directly, as far as we can tell, with campaign matters, at least not yet. Jamil Prokupecz, look, we know that Paul Manafort has had Bob Mueller on him hard for the last several months, including that no-knock raid on his house. Someone else who has been, questioned extensively, or at least probed extensively, is Michael Flynn, the former national security advisor right now. Where else has Robert Mueller's team been looking to give us a sense of where they might head next?
Well, it's very hard to tell, right, really where they may head next. And you almost wonder if the president had not fired the FBI director, where we would be right now. And would we even, we wouldn't have a special counsel, and perhaps maybe all of this would be over now. But obviously, the investigation by Bob Mueller has expanded into other parts. So we know that they have been looked at. Some of the special counsel has been looking at some of the Facebook stuff and some of the Twitter stuff. We know that other people close to the campaign and at one point close to the president have been in and been interviewed by the special counsel. They're not under investigation, like the former chief of staff Reince Priebus, the former spokesperson of the White House press secretary Sean Spicer. Those people have been in there, have been interviewed, and that we believe has more to do with the investigation into the firing of the former FBI director. And there may be other people who have been there that we just don't know yet. The grand jury proceeding that has been going on was sort of used to bring in people who were not willing to come in and cooperate with special counsel. So we did see instances where witnesses were brought in before the grand jury because we were told they were not cooperating with the special counsel, so he would bring them in and seat them before the grand jury and ask questions. And other than really some of those people, we really don't have a window into where things stand now with this investigation. All we know is obviously that it's just not over, and it's going to keep going until some other questions can be answered.
Okay, guys, stay with us. There's a lot more to get through. We're not through all 31 pages yet, but we are getting some color from inside of the White House. Our Jeff Zeleny is reporting that the White House lawyers are sitting down with the president this morning to talk about all of this, the charges against Manafort and Gates. No official statement yet from the White House. Much more when we get back.